miles from anywhere, the kind of dark where the stars look like spilled glitter across a black velvet cloth, and suddenly you see something that just ain't right? Something that makes your gut clench, even before your brain catches up? What do you do in that moment? Do you hammer down, keep on trucking, or do you hit the brakes and see what the universe is throwing your way? I'm telling you, what happened to me out on Route 66 back in '94, well, it still plays in my head like a broken record, keeps me staring at the ceiling when I should be catching Z's. If you've ever had a moment like that, where the world just tilted on its axis, drop a comment below and tell me about it. Maybe we ain't so different, you and I. My name's Hank Miller. Been wrestling these big rigs since I was barely old enough to shave, and even then, it was a close call. Most of my life, it's been the open road, the steady rumble of a diesel engine under my seat, the endless white lines blurring into tomorrow. Back in the '90s, things were simpler, sure, but also a whole lot lonelier. No fancy satellite navigation blabbing directions at you, just a worn-out Rand McNally map, a CB radio crackling with static and the occasional bear report, and the sheer, unadulterated freedom of the highway. I was on a long haul, pushing a load of electronics from Chicago all the way to LA, and by the time I hit New Mexico, I was deep into that familiar road trance. It was late, way past midnight, the kind of dark that swallows headlights whole, and the desert stretched out on either side, an inky black ocean under a sky so vast it made you feel like a speck of dust. Just me, my rig, the Road Warrior, I called her, a trusty old freightliner that had seen more miles than most folks see in a lifetime, and the endless stretch of asphalt humming beneath my tires. I was somewhere on that desolate ribbon of highway between Tucumcari and Santa Rosa, a stretch of the mother road where the only signs of life are the occasional tumbleweeds skittering across the pavement, and the ghosts of travelers long past. My eyes were glued to the road, the yellow glow of my dash lights reflecting in my tired pupils, sipping on some lukewarm coffee that tasted more like burnt tar than anything else. That's when I saw him, a figure on the shoulder just standing there. No car pulled over, no flashing lights, no sign of a breakdown, nothing. Just a man, old, by the looks of him, a silhouette against the faint, almost non-existent glow of my headlights. My first thought, the immediate gut-level reaction of any seasoned trucker, was, no way, can't be right. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to hammer down, to keep that pedal to the metal, and let him disappear into the rear-view mirror like a mirage. A lone old man in the middle of nowhere at this hour in this kind of darkness. That's a setup for trouble, or worse. That's how stories start that you don't want to be the main character in. But something about him, it wasn't desperate. He wasn't waving his arms like a lunatic, wasn't flagging me down like he was stranded or in distress. He was just standing there, still, looking straight ahead, almost like he was expecting me, like he knew I was coming. Specifically, it was that stillness, that eerie calm in the face of such an impossible situation that got to me. It burrowed under my skin, overriding the years of road wisdom that told me to mind my own business and keep rolling. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a strange pull that felt less like curiosity and more like destiny. So, against every single ounce of my better judgment, against the silent protests of my weary body and the logical part of my brain, I eased off the pedal. The big freightliner groaned in protest as I downshifted, the air brakes hissing softly, and I pulled the Road Warrior onto the dusty shoulder, kicking up a cloud of New Mexico grit that momentarily obscured the old man from view. The engine idled, a low rumble in the vast silence, and I sat there, heart thumping a rhythm against my ribs, wondering what in the hell I had just done. The old man didn't move an inch until I finally cut the engine, plunging the immediate vicinity into an even deeper silence, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal of my truck. Then, slow as molasses in January, he turned his head. He was thin, almost gaunt, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, each line etched deep by time and, I suspected, by something far heavier than just the sun. His eyes were like faded blue denim, the kind that had seen too many sunrises and sunsets to count, holding a depth that felt ancient, almost pre-human. He wore a tattered, old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd only ever see in sepia-toned photographs from the 1930s, clinging to his slender frame. No hat, just a shock of white hair, thin but still present, catching the faint glow from my dash lights. He started walking towards my cab, not hurried, not stumbling, just deliberate, each step measured and quiet on the loose gravel. I instinctively reached for the old wrench I kept under the seat, my knuckles white just in case. You never know out here. I rolled down the window, the cool, dry desert air rushing in, mixing with the stale coffee and diesel fumes that usually filled my cab. "Evening, son," he rasped, his voice like gravel on a dirt road, dry and brittle. It was a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used much lately, or perhaps like it had been used to whisper secrets to the wind for too long. "You look like a man who knows these roads." I just nodded, my hand still gripping the wrench, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "Name's Hank Miller," I said, my voice a little rougher than usual. "And you are?" He just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Those eyes, they seemed to be looking through me, past me, fixed on something far beyond the immediate darkness, out into the vast, empty expanse of the desert night. "Silas Blackwood," he said, his gaze still distant. "Just a traveler like yourself, though I've been traveling these particular roads for a long, long time." He didn't ask for a ride, didn't ask for money, didn't even ask for a light. He just stood there looking at me, then at the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out ahead. "You're on the mother road, Hank," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper now, almost swallowed by the immensity of the night. "She's got stories, more than you could ever imagine. Stories buried deep under the asphalt, whispered by the wind through the tumbleweeds." He reached into his coat pocket, his movement slow and deliberate, and pulled out something wrapped in a piece of faded, almost threadbare canvas. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in my chest. What was he pulling out? A knife? A gun? My hand tightened on the wrench, but it was just a small rectangular object. He unwrapped it carefully, his ancient fingers fumbling slightly, revealing an old, brittle road map. It looked like it was from before my time, maybe even before my daddy's time. The paper was yellowed, creased in 1,000 places, and the edges were frayed, almost crumbling. It smelled faintly of dust and something else, something metallic and old, like forgotten secrets. "This here," Silas continued, holding it out to me, his arm trembling slightly, "is a map. But not just any map. It's a guide, a warning, a truth." His eyes, those faded blue eyes, finally met mine, and for a split second I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool desert night. It was like looking into a bottomless well, a void that held more than just darkness. It held knowledge, and that knowledge felt heavy, suffocating. "Take it, Hank," he urged, his voice gaining a strange, almost desperate urgency now. "You'll need it. Some roads, they don't just lead to a destination, they lead to a realization, a reckoning." I hesitated, my hand hovering in the air, inches from the map. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to just slam the window up, throw the truck into gear, and drive away as fast as the road warrior could carry me. But his gaze was compelling, almost hypnotic. It felt like if I didn't take it, something truly terrible would happen, not just to me, but to something far greater. It was a burden, but one I felt compelled to shoulder. So I reached out, my fingers brushing his cold, dry skin as I took the map. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted with untold stories. Silas just nodded, a faint, sad smile on his face, a smile that held a hint of relief, but also a profound sorrow. "Safe travels, Hank Miller," he said, his voice fading, and then without another word, he turned and walked back into the impenetrable darkness from which he came, disappearing as quickly and silently as he'd appeared. I watched his silhouette vanish, then slowly, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, leaving the strange encounter behind, but knowing, deep down, that something fundamental had just shifted. I couldn't get that map out of my head, not for a second. Even after I folded it up and shoved it under the passenger seat out of sight, it felt like it was still there, burning a hole through the floorboard, its strange markings etched behind my eyelids, the skull and crossbones over my current location, the cryptic names like the Whispering Sands and Lost Echoes. They kept replaying in my mind, a silent, terrifying mantra. Sleep was out of the question. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the truck sounded like a whisper. I tried to focus on the road, on the familiar rhythm of the highway, but my mind kept drifting, pulled back to that old, unsettling piece of paper. It was like a magnet, drawing my thoughts, twisting my perception of the familiar landscape. The desert, which usually felt like a comforting albeit vast presence, now seemed to hold 1,000 hidden eyes, watching, waiting. The encounter with Silas Blackwood had ripped a hole in the fabric of my ordinary world, and now, everything felt off. The air itself seemed to hum with an unseen energy, and the silence of the night felt less like peace and more like a held breath, waiting for something to happen. My coffee, usually my best friend on these long hauls, tasted like ash, and the familiar scent of diesel and worn leather in my cab was replaced by that faint, coppery tang from the map. It was a sensory assault, subtle but relentless, chipping away at my composure. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, trying to anchor myself to the tangible reality of the road, but it was a losing battle. The map had already started its work. As the first slivers of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, I found myself approaching a junction I knew well. It was the turnoff for a small, forgotten stretch of old Route 66, a bypass that most modern truckers avoided, preferring the faster, wider interstate. My usual route would have kept me straight, a direct shot to my next checkpoint, but as I neared the exit, my eyes flickered to the passenger seat, even though the map was hidden. It was as if I could feel its presence, a subtle, almost imperceptible tug, like an invisible string pulling at my very will. And then, a fleeting image flashed in my mind clear as day, the old map, open, with a faint red line leading directly down that old bypass, towards a cluster of those strange dots and a symbol I hadn't fully deciphered yet. It was a fleeting thought, a momentary lapse, a whisper in the back of my mind, but it was enough. Just a detour, I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize it, trying to convince myself I was still in control. Maybe I'll find a diner with some real coffee, not this burnt sludge I've been nursing. A lame excuse even to my own ears, a flimsy veil over a decision that felt preordained, but it was enough to justify the turn. The Freightliner rumbled off the main highway, the tires crunching on the older, cracked asphalt of the forgotten road. The air immediately felt different, heavier, as if I'd driven through an invisible curtain, leaving the mundane world behind. The familiar hum of the interstate faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the old road, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of dry brush and the distant, mournful cry of a coyote. The sun, now fully risen, seemed to cast a different kind of light here, a pale, almost sickly glow that made the desert landscape appear alien and unwelcoming. Every shadow seemed deeper, every rock formation more menacing. I was on the map's path now, and a cold certainty settled in my chest. There was no turning back. I couldn't get that map out of my head, not for a second. Even after I folded it up and shoved it under the passenger seat, out of sight, it felt like it was still there, burning a hole through the floorboard. Its strange markings etched behind my eyelids. The skull and crossbones over my current location, the cryptic names like the Whispering Sands and Lost Echoes. They kept replaying in my mind. A silent, terrifying mantra. Sleep was out of the question. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the truck sounded like a whisper. I tried to focus on the road, on the familiar rhythm of the highway, but my mind kept drifting, pulled back to that old, unsettling piece of paper. It was like a magnet drawing my thoughts, twisting my perception of the familiar landscape. The desert, which usually felt like a comforting, albeit vast presence, now seemed to hold 1,000 hidden eyes, watching, waiting. The encounter with Silas Blackwood had ripped a hole in the fabric of my ordinary world, and now, everything felt off. The air itself seemed to hum with an unseen energy, and the silence of the night felt less like peace and more like a held breath, waiting for something to happen. My coffee, usually my best friend on these long hauls, tasted like ash, and the familiar scent of diesel and worn leather in my cab was replaced by that faint, coppery tang from the map. It was a sensory assault, subtle but relentless, chipping away at my composure. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, trying to anchor myself to the tangible reality of the road, but it was a losing battle. The map had already started its work. The sun climbed higher, casting long, distorted shadows across the desolate landscape, making the already eerie surroundings even more unsettling. The old Route 66 here was barely maintained, patched in places, crumbling in others, a testament to decades of neglect. Abandoned gas stations with boarded-up windows and faded, peeling paint stood like skeletal sentinels. monuments to a bygone era, their empty eye sockets staring out at the passing, or rather non-passing world. Every mile I drove, the feeling of unease grew, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, twisting into a coil of dread. The map, though still hidden, felt like it was guiding me, pulling me deeper into its secrets, into a reality that was slowly but surely diverging from the one I knew. I kept checking my rearview mirror, a nervous habit now, half expecting to see Silas Blackwood standing there, a silent, knowing observer, his ancient eyes fixed on my truck. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching behind me, disappearing into the heat haze. Then I saw it. Just as the map had seemed to indicate, tucked away behind a cluster of gnarled mesquite trees, almost swallowed by the encroaching desert, was an old, dilapidated motel, the Mirage Inn. A faded leaning sign proclaimed, its neon tubes long dead, the letters chipped and broken, a cruel joke in this desolate expanse. It wasn't on any modern map, and I'd never seen it before, despite having driven this region for years, knowing every forgotten turnoff and crumbling landmark. The building itself was a ruin, windows shattered, doors hanging ajar, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, revealing the raw, decaying wood beneath. But what made my blood run cold, what sent a jolt of pure terror through my veins, was the symbol painted crudely in faded red on the side of the main office building. The exact same swirling vortex symbol I'd seen on Silas's map, near the Devil's Backbone marking. My foot instinctively hit the brake, sending the road warrior skidding slightly on the loose gravel, the sudden stop jarring my teeth. This wasn't a coincidence. This was too precise, too deliberate. The air around the motel felt thick, heavy, charged with something ancient and malevolent, a palpable presence that made my skin crawl. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the decaying structure, a low vibration that resonated deep in my chest, a discordant note in the otherwise silent desert. It wasn't the sound of wind or wildlife. It was something else, something unnatural, something that felt like it was humming inside my head. A shiver ran down my spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the morning chill. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to get back on the main road, to forget this whole bizarre, terrifying encounter, to dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by fatigue and too much coffee. But a strange, almost hypnotic compulsion held me, rooting me to the spot. It was like the map was whispering to me, urging me forward, promising answers, even as it threatened my sanity, promising a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. My eyes scanned the desolate motel grounds, searching frantically for any sign of life, any explanation, any logical reason for this impossible sight. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the wind through a loose shutter, a sound that seemed to echo with unseen voices. And then, I saw it. A faint, almost transparent shimmer in the doorway of one of the motel rooms, like heat rising from asphalt. But it was too cold for that, too ethereal. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me with a racing heart and the chilling certainty that I was no longer alone on this forgotten stretch of road. The map had led me here, and whatever was here, it was waiting. My hand instinctively went to the door handle, a strange mix of terror and an unshakable, desperate need to know pushing me forward, towards the decaying entrance of the Mirage Inn. My hand instinctively went to the door handle, a strange mix of terror and an unshakable, desperate need to know pushing me forward, towards the decaying entrance of the Mirage Inn. The sun, now a harsh, unforgiving disk in the New Mexico sky, beat down on the desolate landscape, but inside the cab of the Road Warrior, a cold sweat was trickling down my spine. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to put this whole bizarre encounter behind me, to dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by fatigue and too much coffee. But the map, that damn map, felt like a living thing under the passenger seat, a silent, insistent voice urging me on. It was a compulsion I couldn't fight, a morbid curiosity that had taken root deep in my soul. I pushed the heavy door open, and it groaned on rusty hinges, a sound like a dying man's last breath, echoing eerily in the profound silence. A cloud of dust, thick and ancient, billowed out, carrying with it the scent of decay, stale air, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood and forgotten dreams. It was a smell that clawed at the back of my throat, making my stomach churn. The lobby was a graveyard of forgotten memories. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy, broken windows, illuminating the wreckage within. A reception desk, once probably polished wood, was now a splintered husk, covered in a thick blanket of grime. An old rotary telephone lay on its side, its cord severed, a silent testament to a time long past. Faded floral wallpaper peeled from the walls in curling strips, revealing patches of damp, moldy plaster beneath. A calendar, still hanging crookedly by a single nail, was stuck on October 1990. 4 years ago. 4 years since this place had last seen life, or perhaps 4 years since it had last seen normal life. My boots crunched on broken glass and fallen plaster as I stepped further inside, the sound deafening in the oppressive quiet. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, playing tricks on my eyes, and the silence was so profound it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my eardrums. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, of arguments, of hurried footsteps, ghost whispers from a time when this place was alive. But now it was just a tomb. My gaze swept across the room, searching, trying to make sense of the chaos. A rack of dusty, unread brochures for local attractions stood forgotten in a corner, their vibrant colors muted by time and neglect. A forgotten key rack, its numbers faded, held only a few rusty keys, each one a silent promise of a locked secret. My eyes landed on a guest register, half buried under a pile of debris on the counter. My heart gave a lurch. This was it. This was the kind of detail Silas had hinted at, the kind of truth the map promised. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it, brushing away layers of dust and cobwebs. The leather cover was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed and stiff. I flipped it open, my breath catching in my throat. The last entry was indeed from October 1990, and then my eyes fell on the page before it, a series of names, dates, and room numbers. Nothing out of the ordinary, until I noticed the annotations. Small, almost imperceptible symbols scrawled next to certain entries. A tiny, almost invisible skull next to one name. A faint swirling vortex next to another. The exact same symbols from Silas's map. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a guest register. It was a ledger of something else. A list. A list of people who had checked in but perhaps never checked out. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end. I wasn't alone in this place. Not anymore. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. This wasn't just a random old motel. This was a place marked on Silas's map, and the symbols in this register, they were a direct link. My fingers, still trembling, traced the faint, hand-drawn skull next to an entry dated October 12, 1990. John Doe, Room 13. Room 13. The number itself sent a shiver down my spine. Then, next to an entry for October 15, 1990, Jane Smith, Room 7. A tiny, swirling vortex. The same vortex that was on the map near the Mirage Inn symbol. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots, trying to find a logical explanation for what I was seeing. Was this some kind of sick joke? A macabre art project? But the dust, the decay, the profound silence of the place, it was all too real. The metallic, sweet smell in the air seemed to intensify, making my head swim. I flipped through more pages, my eyes scanning for more symbols, more connections, and there they were. More skulls, more vortexes, scattered throughout the entries from that fateful month of October 1990. Each symbol corresponded to a specific room number. It was a pattern, a horrifying, undeniable pattern. My gaze drifted from the register to the key rack. Room 13. The key was still there, hanging on its hook, rusty and forgotten. It was like it was waiting for me. A cold dread settled deep in my bones, but that strange compulsion, that unshakable need to know, was stronger than my fear. I grabbed the key, its cold metal a stark contrast to the clammy sweat on my palm. It felt heavy, like it held the weight of all the secrets of this place. My eyes darted around the desolate lobby, half expecting to see Silas Blackwood standing in the doorway, his ancient eyes watching me, a knowing smile on his lips. But there was nothing, just the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and the oppressive silence. The map, still under my passenger seat, felt like it was vibrating, a silent hum urging me forward. I knew, with a terrifying certainty that room 13 held the answer, the truth Silas had spoken of, the truth that would freeze my soul. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I walked out of the lobby and into the long, dark corridor that led to the motel rooms. The air here was even colder, heavier, and the faint, sweet smell was stronger, almost overpowering. The doors lining the hallway were all closed, like sealed coffins, each one holding its own untold story. The numbers on the doors were faded, some barely visible, but I found it. Room 13. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me in. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound seemed to emanate from within, like fingernails dragging across a rough surface, or something trying to get out. My hand, still clutching the rusty key, trembled as I pushed the door open, the creak echoing down the silent hallway. The room was plunged in shadow, the single window boarded up, blocking out the harsh desert light. The air was thick, stagnant, and the metallic sweet smell was overwhelming now, making me gag. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, and what I saw in the center of the room made my blood run cold, freezing me to the spot. On the floor, in the exact spot where a bed would have been, was a large, dark stain, almost black, that had seeped into the worn carpet, and next to it, scrawled crudely on the wall in what looked like dried, dark liquid, was the same swirling vortex symbol from the map, only much larger, much more menacing. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a warning. And then, I saw the source of the scratching sound. In the corner of the room, half hidden by a fallen curtain, was a small wooden box, old and intricately carved, and from within it, a faint, rhythmic scratching continued, a sound that seemed to claw at the very edges of my sanity. This was the truth. This was the ordeal. And it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The scratching sound was relentless, a tiny, insistent clawing from within the wooden box. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, a vibration that resonated deep in my bones, making my teeth ache, making every nerve ending hum with a terrifying energy. The air in room 13 was thick, heavy with that cloying, metallic sweet stench, now so potent it felt like I was breathing liquid, each inhale a struggle against the suffocating presence. My eyes, still adjusting to the gloom, fixated on the box. It was old, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and intertwine, almost identical to the vortex on the wall, but smaller, more numerous, like 1,000 tiny eyes staring back at me. My mind screamed at me to run, to bolt from this cursed place and never look back, to dismiss it all as a fever dream brought on by too many miles and too little sleep. Every instinct of self-preservation roared in my ears, a primal warning to flee. But that other compulsion, the one Silas Blackwood had ignited with his map, was a cold, unyielding hand pushing me forward. It was the need to know, the desperate, terrifying urge to uncover the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter how much it shattered my understanding of the world. My legs felt like lead, each step an agonizing effort, but I forced myself to move, one foot in front of the other, towards the corner where the box lay. The scratching intensified, a frantic, desperate rhythm, as if whatever was inside knew I was approaching, knew its moment of revelation was at hand. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in the suffocating silence, each beat echoing the dread building within me. I knelt down, the dust motes dancing around my head like malevolent spirits, swirling in the faint light that managed to penetrate the gloom. The box was surprisingly heavy, its wood cold to the touch despite the oppressive heat of the desert outside. There was no latch, no obvious opening mechanism, just the intricate carvings and the relentless scratching from within. I ran my fingers over the surface, searching for a seam, a hidden catch, my skin crawling with every brush against the ancient wood. My breath hitched. On the lid, almost imperceptible against the dark wood, was a faint, dried smear. It looked like blood. Old, dark, congealed blood, a grim testament to something unspeakable. My stomach lurched, threatening to betray me, the taste of bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just a box, it was a coffin, a container for something that shouldn't be contained, a vessel of pure, distilled horror. The scratching suddenly stopped. An abrupt, terrifying silence descended, even heavier than before, a vacuum that sucked the air from the room. My own breathing sounded like a roar in my ears, ragged and desperate. Then a faint, almost inaudible click. A hidden panel on the side of the box slid open, revealing a narrow slit, and from that slit, a single rolled-up piece of parchment yellowed with age slowly began to emerge, pushed out by an unseen force from within. My hand shot out, snatching it before it could fall to the dusty floor. It was tied with a thin, brittle string, and as I untied it, the parchment unrolled itself, revealing a series of meticulously drawn, incredibly detailed sketches. They weren't just drawings. They were portraits. Portraits of people. People I recognized. People from the guest register. And next to each portrait, scrawled in a delicate, almost artistic hand, were dates. Dates that matched the entries in the register. And then, I saw it. The last portrait. It was Silas Blackwood. His face younger but unmistakably him. His eyes holding that same ancient, knowing look. And next to his portrait, a date. October 18th, 1990. 3 days after the last entry in the register. And below his name, a single chilling phrase, written in the same elegant script. The Collector. My soul froze. It wasn't just a list of victims. It was a record of a hunter. And Silas wasn't just a traveler. He was the one who had been here. He was the one who had done this. And he had given me his ledger. The parchment slipped from my numb fingers, fluttering to the dusty floor like a dead leaf, a silent testament to the horror it contained. The Collector. The words echoed in the suffocating silence of room 13, a chilling pronouncement that explained everything and nothing all at once. Silas Blackwood, the old man who had appeared out of nowhere, his eyes like bottomless wells, his voice like gravel. He wasn't just a mentor, a guide, a strange old man lost on the highway. He was the architect of this horror, the one who had meticulously documented his acquisitions. The portraits, so lifelike, so hauntingly accurate, were not just sketches. They were trophies, each face a silent scream, each date a marker of a life extinguished. And the dates were when these souls had been added to his collection. My own face felt like stone, my blood like ice water in my veins, every muscle rigid with a terror that went beyond mere fear. The dark stain on the carpet, the swirling vortex on the wall, the metallic sweet smell that now seemed to permeate my very being. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality, forming a mosaic of unspeakable evil. This wasn't just a motel. It was a hunting ground, a place where lives were meticulously ended, and their essences catalogued. And Silas, the benevolent old man, was the hunter. He had given me his legacy, his confession, his burden. He hadn't just passed on a map. He had passed on a truth, a horrifying, undeniable truth that now clung to me like a shroud, a second skin of dread. The soul freezing wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal sensation, a chilling realization that the world was far darker, far more predatory than I had ever dared to imagine. A sudden overwhelming urge to flee, to escape this cursed place surged through me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. The air felt too thin, too heavy, too tainted with the lingering presence of unspeakable acts. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady, my head spinning, a wave of nausea washing over me. The silence of the room, once merely oppressive, now felt menacing, filled with the unseen echoes of past screams, of desperate struggles. I didn't dare look back at the box or the parchment or the stain. My eyes darted to the boarded-up window, then to the door, the only way out, a beacon of hope in this abyss of despair. I had to get out. Now. I stumbled out of room 13, practically falling into the dimly lit corridor, my heart still hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The cold, heavy air of the motel seemed to cling to me, a tangible presence, a ghostly hand on my shoulder. I didn't stop to look at any other rooms, didn't pause to consider what other horrors might lie behind those closed doors. My only thought was to reach the sunlight, to breathe clean air, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the Mirage Inn. I burst out of the lobby, blinking in the harsh glare of the New Mexico sun, which now seemed almost too bright, too innocent for the darkness I had just witnessed. I ran to the road warrior, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the engine started. The familiar roar of the diesel engine was a welcome sound, a lifeline back to sanity, a promise of escape. I threw the truck into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and spun her around, heading back the way I came. away from the motel, away from the truth I had uncovered. The map, still under the passenger seat, felt like a burning coal, a constant reminder of the horror, a permanent stain on my existence. I was no longer just Hank Miller, a trucker on Route 66. I was Hank Miller, the man who knew, the man who carried Silas Blackwood's truth. The road ahead, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like an endless escape route, and the weight of what I knew was a heavier load than any cargo I had ever hauled. The journey back was just beginning, but I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I would never truly return to the man I was before. The parchment, that cursed piece of paper, lay crumpled on the dusty floor, a silent scream echoing in the suffocating air of room 13. The collector, the words, scrawled in that elegant, almost artistic hand, burned themselves into my mind, branding my very soul. Silas Blackwood. The name, once just a strange old man's moniker, now resonated with a chilling, predatory hum. He wasn't just a lost traveler, a wise old mentor dispensing cryptic advice. He was a monster, a meticulous architect of horror, and I, Hank Miller, had just been handed his ledger, his confession, his horrifying legacy. The portraits, those hauntingly lifelike sketches, flashed behind my eyes, each face a silent testament to a life extinguished, each date a chilling marker of a soul added to his macabre collection. The dark stain on the carpet, the one I'd initially dismissed as just an old spill, now pulsed with a grotesque new meaning, a testament to the final moments of someone who had once stood where I now stood. The swirling vortex on the wall, no longer just a bizarre symbol, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a gateway to an abyss I had unwittingly stumbled into. This wasn't just a motel, it was a tomb, a hunting ground, a place where the veil between worlds felt terrifyingly thin, and Silas Blackwood was its grim reaper. My own face felt like stone, my blood like ice water in my veins, every muscle rigid with a terror that went beyond mere fear. It was a primal, gut-wrenching dread that clawed at my insides, twisting them into knots, threatening to tear me apart from the inside out. The soul-freezing wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal sensation, a chilling realization that the world was far darker, far more predatory than I had ever dared to imagine. Every shadow in the room seemed to lengthen, to writhe, to take on grotesque forms, whispering unseen horrors, pressing in on me from all sides. The metallic sweet smell, once merely nauseating, now felt like it was seeping into my pores, tainting me, marking me as a witness, a participant in this unspeakable secret. I was no longer just Hank Miller, a trucker passing through. I was Hank Miller, the man who knew, the man who carried Silas Blackwood's truth. And that truth was a heavier load than any cargo I had ever hauled, a burden that threatened to crush me under its immense weight, a weight that settled deep in my chest, making every breath a conscious effort. The silence of the room, once merely oppressive, now felt menacing, filled with the unseen echoes of past screams, of desperate struggles, of lives brutally cut short. I could almost hear them, the whispers of the collected, their spectral voices swirling around me, trapped within these decaying walls, forever bound to the horror of their final moments, forever crying out for a justice that would never come. This was the reward for my curiosity, the prize for my refusal to just keep on trucking. A truth so vile, so utterly devoid of humanity, that it ripped a hole in the very fabric of my reality, leaving me exposed to a darkness I could never unsee. A sudden, overwhelming urge to flee, to escape this cursed place surged through me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. The air felt too thin, too heavy, too tainted with the lingering presence of unspeakable acts. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady, my head spinning, a wave of nausea washing over me, threatening to empty the contents of my stomach onto the grimy floor. My eyes darted around the room, searching frantically for an escape, a way out of this nightmare. The boarded-up window offered no solace, only deeper shadows, a cruel reminder of the trap I had willingly walked into. The door, the only way out, seemed miles away, a distant beacon of hope in this abyss of despair. I had to get out. Now. I didn't dare look back at the box, or the parchment, or the stain. My only thought was to reach the sunlight, to breathe clean air, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the Mirage Inn. I stumbled out of room 13, practically falling into the dimly lit corridor, my heart still hammering against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage, desperate to break free. The cold, heavy air of the motel seemed to cling to me, a tangible presence. A ghostly hand on my shoulder pushing me, urging me forward but also holding me back, trying to drag me deeper into its dark embrace. I didn't stop to look at any other rooms, didn't pause to consider what other horrors might lie behind those closed doors. Each one was a sealed tomb, a silent testament to the evil that had permeated this place. My only thought was to reach the sunlight, to breathe clean air, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the Mirage Inn. I burst out of the lobby, blinking in the harsh glare of the New Mexico sun, which now seemed almost too bright, too innocent for the darkness I had just witnessed. The world outside felt alien, too vibrant, too normal. How could the sun shine so brightly after what I had seen? How could the birds sing? It felt like a cruel joke, a cosmic indifference to the horror that had just unfolded. I ran to the Road Warrior, my trusty Freightliner, my sanctuary, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the engine started. The familiar roar of the diesel engine was a welcome sound, a lifeline back to sanity, a promise of escape, a deafening roar that drowned out the whispers of the collected. I threw the truck into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and spun her around, heading back the way I came, away from the motel, away from the truth I had uncovered. The map, still under the passenger seat, felt like a burning coal, a constant reminder of the horror, a permanent stain on my existence, a physical manifestation of the burden I now carried. I was no longer just Hank Miller, a trucker on Route 66, concerned with mileage and delivery times. I was Hank Miller, the man who knew, the man who carried Silas Blackwood's truth, a truth that had shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. The road ahead, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like an endless escape route, and the weight of what I knew was a heavier load than any cargo I had ever hauled, a burden that would follow me, haunt me, for the rest of my days. The journey back was just beginning, but I knew with a chilling certainty that I would never